Next to join us is Marjan Keypour. Marjan Keypour is a human rights activist and advocate for women and minorities in Iran. She is the founder and director of the Alliance for Women's Rights of All Minorities, ARAM, an international network of activists which promotes equal rights for all citizens in Iran, and Stop Femicide Iran, an advocacy campaign which monitors and documents acts of femicide and memorializes their victims. Thank you so much for being here, Marjan.
Thank you, Natalie. It's really a pleasure to be with you and among such a distinguished group of activists and friends of human rights and friends of the people of Iran. I have some remarks prepared, but I'm going to try to present them in a conversational way to keep the flow. I have been involved in human rights advocacy representing women and minorities for the past 10 years. And even though I was born and raised in Iran and I lived my formative years during the post-Iranian Revolution Iran, I have continued to see the situation worsen with the level of atrocities and violence that the regime has continued to commit against Iranian women and minorities, and really against all of the citizens of its country. But something that is really striking for me is that as a child growing up in Iran, our Iranian calendar was always filled with joyous, happy occasions. We had beautiful traditional Iranian holidays like Yalda, Mehregan, Tirgan, Nowruz, and these are all events that filled our Iranian calendar. But since the bloody revolution in 1979, the calendar has become a dark calendar filled with days of executions, days of crackdown of protesters, days of maiming and committing countless atrocities against the people of Iran and also through the proxies abroad. Just between the months of May and June, there are several dates that are worth mentioning. There are several lives that were taken from us that are worth mentioning. And I'm only going to point out to some of the more famous women who lost their lives during such days. And I want to begin by a woman, legendary woman named Farrokhru Parsa, who was the first female minister to participate in Shah's cabinet. And she was in charge of education for all of Iran. And she was a feminist and she believed in the rights for education for men and women. But Farrokhru was one of the first people that was targeted by the Iranian regime, by the Islamic regime. And she was to be made an example of. And she was taken, and she was at the time, a middle-aged woman, and she was taken to the execution squad, and she was executed on June 8th of 1990 by firing squad in order to make an example of her and teach, a message to the Iranian women that is today very familiar and similar to what we hear from the Taliban. A month later, on June 18th, a group of 10 Baha'i women who were school educators, Sunday school teachers equivalents for the Baha'i community, were violently taken from their homes and were pushed to renounce their religion or choose between renouncing their religion or death. And they did not want to renounce their religion. They wanted to stay true to who they were, because the Baha'i faith is an indigenous religion in the country of Iran. And because they did not want to let go of who they were, and they wanted to embrace their true identities, they were killed in an act of mass execution by the Iranian regime. All of them, the 10 women, and they were Mona Mahmoudinejad was a 16-year-old girl among them. Other women were between ages of 23 and 50. I'm just going to mention some of these names because they need to be memorialized and they need to be remembered in our calendars. Izzat Jahannami, Roya Eshwari, Taraneh Arjamand, Zareen Morimi, Shirin Delavand, Akhtar Sabet, Simin Saberi, and Mahshid Nurmand. These were women who lost their lives in an act of mass execution on June 18th of 1980. And then, of course, someone mentioned the fact that 15 years ago, Neda Agha Sultan lost her life as she was protesting sham elections in Iran before, and she died in front of our cameras. CNN and many other news agencies, they covered in live format the bloody and sad death of Neda Agha Sultan. And we thought that this would be it, that this would be the end, that once the international community sees how the Iranian regime treats its own people, finally there is going to be major uproar and outrage, and this brutalities will stop. But it didn't. We see that 15 years, the regime has only expanded its level of crackdown and violence against women and against all of the Iranian people. And of course, we marked 2 years ago with the Mahsa Amini's murder that sparked an unprecedented wave of outrage and unrest in the country. We saw that thousands took to the streets to only to be arrested, shot at, captured violently, and be subject to unspeakable crimes, including torture and rape. And others were shot at with pellet guns, and so many women got blinded. The pellet guns were later on shown by Amnesty International that were purposely aiming women's genitalias and breasts in order to maim them and shame them. The same things also happened to men, but the virulence and the hatred with which they treated women is never to be forgiven or forgotten. And of course, the atrocities against women and girls in Iran did not stop there. We saw that in order to punish the schoolgirls who bravely took to the streets, who bravely spoke against the brutalities of the regime, they retaliated against the school children, and they poisoned them across the schools across the country, whether it was the regime directly or their affiliates. They never really properly looked into what was going on. And so many girls got violently ill, and actually a handful of them lost their lives. And Mona, Neda, Mahsa, they're icons representing the ongoing struggles that people of Iran are facing. And they're tragic.
Marjan, thank you for, first of all, for reading off all their names, because it really is important for us to remember who we're fighting for and to make sure that we remember their names, that they don't die in vain, that through their deaths and through their pain, that we fight for something good. So I just want to say thank you for calling out all their names and really remembering them.
Of course. And I think that now it's incumbent upon the international community. And I'm speaking specifically to the feminists around the world, especially in the Western countries, who have time and again ignored the atrocities that are committed by the Iranian regime and their perpetrators across the world, for them to speak out with the same vehemence and with the same level of condemnation against the violence that is taking place inside Iran and against the violence that took place on October 7th by the Iranian regime proxies. We cannot forgive, we cannot forgive, we cannot ignore, we cannot dismiss. There is no cultural, there is no political explanation that can justify such atrocities that are taking place against the Iranian women and happened on October 7th against the Israeli women. I beg of you, all the feminists anywhere in the world, to speak out and condemn this. It's not too late to do that.